The iron gates of the mansion slid open just as the rain began to fall harder, each drop striking the marble driveway like a ticking clock. Armin Hale barely noticed. His mind was buried in numbers, meetings, and the familiar emptiness that followed every business victory. As he stepped out of his car, adjusting his coat, something near the entrance caught his eye. A small shape collapsed against the massive wooden door. At first he thought it was a bundle of clothes left behind by a careless visitor. Then it moved. Armin froze. There, curled on the cold stone floor, was a young girl no older than 10. Her arms were wrapped tightly around her stomach as if trying to hold herself together. Her face was pale, lips dry, and her breathing shallow. Rainwater soaked her thin dress, making her shiver uncontrollably. "What on earth?" Armin whispered, his voice swallowed by the storm. Instinct told him to step back, to call security, to let someone else handle it. This was not his world. His life was sealed behind gates, guarded from chaos like this. Yet his feet moved on their own. He knelt beside her, the sharp contrast between his polished shoes and her bare, trembling feet sending a strange ache through his chest. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked softly. Her eyes fluttered open, large, dark, and filled with a fear far too old for her age. She tried to speak, but only a weak sound escaped. Her fingers reached out and clutched the edge of his coat with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered. "Don't close the door." Those 4 words struck him harder than any loss he had ever faced. In that moment, the rain, the mansion, the fortune behind him, none of it mattered. All Armin could see was a child standing at the edge of hope, using the last of her strength to beg a stranger not to turn away. He glanced at the towering door behind him, then back at the girl in his arms. And without knowing why, he felt something inside him shift, something long buried, now awake and demanding to be answered. Armin lifted the girl carefully, startled by how light she felt, as if the storm itself weighed more than her. The door closed behind them with a soft echo, shutting out the rain but not the unease that followed him inside. The grand hall, usually silent and immaculate, now felt painfully exposed, its luxury clashing with the fragile life in his arms. The girl stirred, her head resting weakly against his shoulder. "I didn't know where else to go," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They said you wouldn't listen, but my mother said you would." Armin paused mid-step. "Your mother?" he asked, lowering her onto a couch near the fireplace. He draped a warm throw around her shoulders, watching her hands shake as they clutched the fabric. "Who is she?" The girl swallowed hard as if the answer itself took effort. "Her name is Lena. She's very sick. She told me to find you if things got worse." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him with quiet determination that felt out of place on such a small face. "How did you even find this place?" Armin asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a worn photograph, creased and faded. It showed a much younger Armin standing beside a woman whose smile was bright enough to pierce the past he had carefully locked away. His breath caught. "She kept this," the girl said softly. "She said you once promised to help, even if you never knew me." The room seemed to tilt. Armin's chest tightened as memories he had buried under years of success pushed their way back to the surface. Promises spoken in hopeful days. Choices made in fear. Roads not taken. The girl shifted closer, her voice trembling now. "I walked all day. I was scared you'd send me away." Armin stared at the photograph, then at the child whose fate now rested in his hands. For the first time in years he realized the greatest risk wasn't opening his door, it was what would happen if he closed it. The girl finished the warm broth slowly, as if afraid it might disappear if she rushed. Armin sat across from her, studying every small movement, the careful way she held the spoon, the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted around the room as though expecting to be asked to leave at any moment. This was not hunger alone, it was the memory of being turned away too many times. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Mira," she replied, wiping her mouth with her sleeve before realizing what she'd done and quickly lowering her hand. "My mom says manners matter, even when things are hard." A faint smile touched Armin's lips, then vanished just as quickly. "She raised you well." Mira hesitated, then leaned forward. "She didn't want me to come. But she couldn't stand any more, and the landlord was shouting, and the lights were gone." Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers twisted together. "She said you were the one person who might remember her." Armin stood and walked to the window, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. He remembered Lena now, not as a name but as laughter, shared dreams, and a time when he believed success meant building something together. He had chosen ambition instead, telling himself it was temporary. Temporary had turned into years. Behind him, Myra's voice grew smaller. If you don't want me here, I'll go. I don't want trouble. I just need help from my mom. Armin turned sharply. You're not going anywhere tonight. Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his tone. Tomorrow we'll see a doctor. We'll find your mother. We'll make sure she's safe. Myra's shoulders sagged, relief washing over her face like a quiet wave. She slid off the couch and, without thinking, wrapped her arms around him. He stiffened at first and used to closeness, then slowly placed a hand on her back. She felt so small. Too small for the weight she carried. In that moment, Armin understood something he had ignored for years. Success had never filled the empty spaces in his life. Standing there, holding a child who trusted him completely, he felt the past and future collide, and he knew there would be no walking away this time. Morning arrived quietly, filtered through tall windows and drawn curtains. Armin had barely slept. His thoughts circled the same question again and again. How many times had he told himself he would fix things later? Now later had knocked on his door and collapsed in his arms. A soft sound pulled him from his thoughts. Mira stood at the edge of the hallway, rubbing her eyes, the oversized sweater Martha had found hanging off her small frame. She looked unsure, like a guest afraid of overstaying her welcome. I didn't mean to wake you, she said quickly. You didn't, Armin replied, kneeling to her level. Did you sleep at all? She nodded, then hesitated. I dreamed I couldn't find you. The door was closed again. The words tightened something in his chest. That won't happen, he said quietly. Not today. Within the hour they were on the road. Mira pressed her forehead to the car window, watching the city change as the tall buildings gave way to older streets. Her voice broke the silence. My mom used to say people aren't bad, just busy forgetting. Armin gripped the steering wheel harder. Those words felt uncomfortably true. At the small hospital, Myra's steps slowed. Fear crept into her eyes as she clutched Armin's sleeve. What if she's worse? He bent slightly. Then we face it together. They found Lena in a narrow room washed in pale light. She looked smaller than Armin remembered, but when her eyes met his, recognition flared, followed by disbelief. You came, she whispered. I should have come sooner, Armin replied, his voice thick. Mira rushed forward, taking her mother's hand. Tears slid silently down Lena's cheeks as she looked from her daughter to the man standing beside her bed. I didn't know where else to turn, she said. I never wanted to burden you. Armin shook his head. This isn't a burden. It's a responsibility I ignored. In that moment, surrounded by quiet machines and fragile hope, Armin realized something profound. Fixing the future meant finally facing the past. And this time he wasn't running. The days that followed unfolded like a test Armin hadn't studied for, yet somehow understood. He arranged care for Lena, not with grand gestures but with steady presence. He showed up every morning, sometimes with Mira, sometimes alone, learning the quiet language of waiting rooms and hushed conversations. Wealth could open doors, he discovered, but it could not replace patience or sincerity. Mira began to change. Color returned to her face and her laughter, soft at first, started to fill the spaces that silence once ruled. One afternoon, as they sat in the hospital garden, she looked up at Armin with a seriousness that startled him. Did you ever feel lost, she asked, even when everyone thought you had everything? The question landed deeper than she could have known. Armin exhaled slowly. Yes, he admitted. For a long time. She nodded, as if that answer confirmed something important. My mom says people can find their way again if they're brave enough to stop pretending. That night, Armin stood alone in his office, staring at the city lights he once believed defined success. Contracts waited on his desk, but for the first time they felt distant, less urgent than the promise he was quietly keeping. He canceled a major trip, then another. The world didn't fall apart. In fact, it felt strangely lighter. When Lena finally grew stronger, she thanked him with tired eyes and a trembling smile. You didn't have to do all this. I know, Armin replied. But I needed to. Later, Mira slipped her hand into his as they walked down the hospital corridor. Does this mean you're staying? She asked. Armin squeezed her hand gently. It means I'm not leaving. In choosing them, he realized he wasn't giving up his life, he was reclaiming the part of it that truly mattered. Weeks later, the mansion no longer felt like a monument to solitude. It breathed with new rhythms. Soft footsteps in the morning, quiet conversations at dinner, laughter echoing down halls that once knew only silence. Armin noticed the change most in himself. He woke earlier, not from pressure but from purpose. Mira started school nearby. On her first day she stood at the gate, backpack clutched tightly, doubt flickering across her face. Armin knelt beside her. "Remember," he said, "you didn't come this far by giving up." She smiled, small but steady, and walked forward without looking back. Lena, recovering steadily, found work helping at a community center, determined to rebuild with dignity. One evening she stopped Armin in the hallway. "You didn't just help us survive," she said softly. "You helped us believe again." Armin shook his head. "You helped me remember who I was meant to be." Months passed. One night, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Mira placed the old photograph on the table between them. "We don't need this anymore," she said. "You're here now." Armin studied the faded image, then folded it carefully, not to hide it but to honor it. "Some things lead us where we're meant to go," he replied. Years later, people would speak of the businessman who changed lives through generosity. Few knew the truth, that everything began the night a child collapsed at his door, carrying nothing but courage and hope. And Armin knew, without doubt, that the greatest fortune he ever gained was not measured in wealth, but in the lives that found safety when he finally chose to open the door.